Hi, I'm Mitch Gallagher. Welcome to Sweetwater's Guitars and Gear. This time out, an effects switching system from Boss. Let's get started. Today we're checking out the Boss ES-8 effects switching system, a comprehensive hub that allows you to operate all your effects, your amps, your pedals, your rack gear, pretty much anything that you need for your guitar rig can be controlled from right here in the ES-8. One of the big problems with using a pedal board on stage is that it's difficult to change multiple effects at the same time. It's easy to get messed up on what pedals you're stepping on. It takes your attention away from your playing. You also can't change the order of your effects. You don't really have a lot of control over what's happening there. With an ES-8 switching system, you have control over all those aspects. Here's how it works. It seems complex, but it's actually very simple. Your guitar signal comes out of your guitar and into one of the inputs on the ES-8. There are actually two inputs, so you can have two guitars connected simultaneously, and you can switch between those using either a foot switch or you can store that setting per patch. Once the signal is inside the ES-8, you use loop connections to send it out to different pedals. So we've got 6 monophonic loops. Each of those has an input and an output. When you activate that loop by either stepping on a switch or calling up a preset where it's turned on, the signal goes out of the output, through your pedal, and comes back into the ES-8, and then it routes to the next loop. If that loop is active, it goes out to that pedal and comes back into the ES-8. If that loop is not active, it just bypasses it and moves on to either the next loop or to the output that feeds into your amplifier. So we've got a chain of loops, and you can turn those on and off independently and bring your effects in and out that way. We have a 7th loop that allows us to do a mono send and either a mono or stereo return. So if you've got a stereo chorus or a delay that has a mono input and a stereo output, you can connect it into that loop. The final loop, loop number 8, is a stereo in and stereo out loop. You can use that for mono, you can use that to send in mono and return in stereo, or you can use it to send in stereo and return in stereo. So this is very flexible as far as routing your different pedal effects. We also have a 9th loop available to us, and that can be used for connecting a volume pedal, which is how I have it set up here, or you could use that to send into an effects loop on your amplifier and bring the signal back from the effects loop in your amplifier and into the ES-8 for further routing. Finally, we have 2 outputs. You can connect 1 or 2 amplifiers, and if you're connecting 2 amplifiers, you can either switch between those, use one, say, for your clean sound and one for your dirty sound, or hook both of them up simultaneously and use them for stereo. That's the way I'm set up here. So my signal path is I'm coming out of my PRS Modern Eagle 2 into the ES-8. Loop number 1 is going to my Boss Super Overdrive SD1W. Loop number 2 is going to my Boss Super Octave OC3. Loop number 3 is going to my DM2W delay from Boss. I don't have anything connected into loop 4, 5, or 6, but in loop 7 I have my vintage Dimension C pedal. That has a mono input and a stereo output, so I'm sending the signal out of loop 7 into the Dimension C and then coming back with a stereo chorus effect. Loop number 8 is hooked up to my Boss DD7 digital delay, which has a stereo input and a stereo output, so I'm using that for true stereo operation. Now of course you can use any manufacturer's pedals with the ES-8, I just happen to have my collection of Boss pedals here today. The 2 outputs from the ES-8 are feeding into my Rivera Venus 3 amplifier on one side, and on the other side into a Fender 65 Deluxe Reverb reissue. Let's take a quick look at the front panel of the ES-8. It's very easy to operate. As far as foot switches go, we have 8 foot switches that are numbered, 1 through 8. And those are used to turn the individual loops on and off when we're in manual mode, or if we're in preset mode, they're used for calling up presets. We have bank up and down switches, and we have 100 banks available to us, giving us a total of 800 presets inside the ES-8. That's plenty to cover most gigs. We also have a mute switch, and of course that silences the output from the ES-8. But even when the unit's muted, we're still sending out of a tuner output, which can be fed into a tuner. Finally, we have the memory manual switch, and that switches between the 2 modes of operation for the ES-8. When we're in manual mode, the 8 numbered switches turn our loops on and off manually. So in this case, I've got my dry signal, none of the loops are active. But when I step on one of the numbered foot switches, it brings in that particular loop. So if I step on number 1, it'll turn on my Super Overdrive. If I step on number 2, it'll bring in my Super Octave. Number 3 brings in my analog delay. And 7 and 8 engage my stereo effects. So we can turn both of those on. So if you want to use the ES-8 as a traditional pedal board where you're just bringing your loops in and out and turning on those effects when you step on the switches, you can certainly do it that way. The other mode of operation is memory mode, where we can recall patches. And this is very interesting because it gives us a lot of power for controlling our effects. So let's switch over to that mode. Now in memory mode, when we step on one of the numbered foot switches, we recall a patch. And again, we have 100 banks of 8 patches. We switch among the banks using the bank up and down button, and then the numbered foot switches recall the particular patches within that bank. Now a patch stores all the settings inside the ES-8, so that can be the combination of loops that are turned on and off, as well as a variety of other settings that we'll talk about in just a minute. But the way this works is, when I recall preset number 1, all the loops that I've assigned to be turned on with that preset will be activated. So here's my dry sound. And when I step on preset 1, now what's happened there is I've programmed preset 1 to turn on the loop for the super overdrive, for the super octave, and for the stereo digital delay. So all 3 of those effects are coming on simultaneously. Now when I step on preset 2, it activates the super overdrive with the analog delay. Preset 3 turns on my 2 stereo effects. In addition to being able to save the status of the loops, whether they're on or off or not, we can also program per patch what's happening with the volume pedal. In this case, I've got it active, so I can swell into this. We can assign where in the signal path any of these loops occur. So the volume pedal could be placed at the beginning of the chain, or for the next patch, I could say assign it to be the end of the chain to silence everything. You could either put it before your delay, after the delay. The choice is yours wherever you want that routed. It's very easy to set up. The ES-8 also has 2 expression pedal inputs that can be routed to control different effects. In this case, I've got a Roland EV5 expression pedal connected into the ES-8, and it's controlling the expression pedal input on my stereo digital delay on the DD7. So when I turn that up and down, I'm affecting the volume of the digital delay. So I have a lot of expressive capability there using an expression pedal to control whatever parameter I want in any pedal that can accept that input. Speaking of control, we have 6 outputs that can be used for switching functions. So we could assign one of those to change the channels on an amp, for example, or we could turn the reverb on and off on an amplifier. Basically any device that can accept a 1/4-inch switch can be controlled from those output jacks. And as with everything else, all this is configurable per patch. So we could set up one patch where we've got that control routed to change our amp switching, and another patch that may be inactive and we're turning the reverb on and off. We may be routing the expression pedal to the delay in one situation, not in another situation. We might have a situation where we want some switches active, some not. All of that can be stored as part of a preset. When we're in memory mode, we can even assign the switches to turn effects on and off. So here's an example for you. I've programmed up a dry patch where there's nothing happening. No effects active there, but I've programmed it so when I step on switch 7, I'm bringing in my stereo chorus. It's a momentary switch, so the chorus will only be active for as long as I hold that switch down. This is great in a situation where you want to bring an effect in and out very quickly, but you want to have a preset that calls up a number of other settings for you as well. In this case, I've programmed that setting so that it only works when I have my foot on the switch. But we could also set it up with a latching switch where I step on the switch like normal and it would stay on until I step on it again to turn it off. Beyond this, we can also send tap tempo information from the ES-8. So you can assign one of the switches to be a master tap tempo switch, or in fact, you can program every preset with a specific tempo that will be sent out to any devices that can receive it as soon as you select that preset. But it even goes farther than that. You can program the volume for each preset, and you can change the order of the effects loops. You don't have to use them 1 through 8. Let me give you an example of how this works. I've got preset number 2 set up with loop 1 and loop 3 active. Loop 1 comes first, it's my super overdrive, and it's feeding into the analog delay. But it's very easy to reverse that order by switching where the loops are in the signal path. We do that by hitting the edit button, selecting patch, selecting loop structure, hitting enter, and now we're presented with our 8 loops. We can scroll across and just use our up-down buttons to determine where the loops are placed. So I placed loop 1 after loop 3 in this case. So the delayed signal is now feeding into my overdrive. And we can switch that back by hitting the plus button. Now the overdrive signal is feeding into the delay. So it's very easy to customize the routing to exactly how you want to use it. You're not locked in to having your loops in any specific order. Another great thing about the ES-8 is that it allows you to very easily create parallel effects routings. So you can split your signal in two and have different effects on the two sides of that. So we might have one side going through a chorus and the other side going through an overdrive. And when you combine those two back together, you get a different sound than when you route one through the other. It's very easy to create parallel routings. Just move the cursor over to select where you want the parallel effect to take place, select it, and it'll be automatically opened up. So you can see here we've got a parallel loop. The other thing that parallel effects routing provides for us is the ability to do what Boss calls carryover. Normally when you step on a switch and a reverb tail or a delay tail is sounding, that tail will be cut off. But with carryover, routed through a parallel effects routing and into one of those mixers, you can have that tail continue sounding when you make changes using your switches. The ES-8 also has full MIDI capability, so you can use it to control MIDI rigs, MIDI amplifiers, rack mount effects. You can work with MIDI clock signals, so if you're synchronizing things on stage, all that can be routed through the ES-8 as well. To maintain maximum signal integrity, the ES-8 also gives you the option of turning its buffers on and off. There are two buffers in the unit, one at the beginning and one at the end of the signal chain, and you can selectively turn those on and off. And this is great if you're trying to interface with something that's sensitive to buffers like a wah-wah pedal. There's so much more to talk about with the ES-8 effects switching system from Boss. We have so much control over what's happening with our effects, so many parameters you can adjust. All of that can be saved and stored in your presets and easily recalled. You have an option of controlling external gear for connecting external control pedals. You really have a comprehensive device here for managing your entire system, yet it's very easy to operate. And they've thought of everything. The ES-8 comes with rubber feet if you're using it on a carpeted floor like this, or it has a flat bottom if you're putting Velcro on it for connecting it to a pedal board, or in fact, it has two screw inserts so you can bolt it right down to your pedal board if you want to. If you're looking for an effect switching system that gives you an incredible amount of power, yet it's very easy to use and extremely flexible, then the ES-8 effect switching system for Boss is one you're definitely going to want to check out. I'm very excited about it. There's definitely going to be one landing on my pedal board. I hope you've enjoyed this installment of Sweetwater's Guitars and Gear. Be sure to tune in next time. We'll have more guitars, more amps, more effects, and we'll be making lots of music. I'm Mitch Gallagher.